This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
I'm Roby Brock. Thanks for joining us. It's been a hectic and busy week in Washington, D.C. Confrontations in Congress, the White House, certainly across the nation's political landscape. I caught up with 1st District Congressman Rick Crawford for his take on the Supreme Court, partisanship, and undoing Obamacare. Representative, good to have you with us. Let's talk about the Supreme Court pick that President Donald Trump let loose on Tuesday night. What do you think of Neil Gorsuch? Do you approve of the president's pick?
I think it's consistent with what he campaigned on. He had a list of, I think, around 20 during the campaign that he had floated, and came down to 3. I think all 3 of those are consistent with what he talked about. All 3 of them were, I think, on that obviously on that original list. This is someone I think you can count on to be in the mold of Justice Scalia, so I think it's a great pick.
We obviously are seeing, just through some of the national reporting, you can turn on any of the cable channels, you can turn on C-SPAN. It looks like this will be just a very, not necessarily because Judge Gorsuch is controversial, but just because Republicans and Democrats do not seem to want to play well together in the same sandbox at this point in time. I know this will be more on the Senate side, but what can you kind of tell me about the mood that is going on in the Capitol right now between the 2 political parties and their leadership?
Well, I think in every opportunity for somebody like Nancy Pelosi to take a shot. Now, you said it yourself that we have very little to say in this deal. We can, wring our hands and beat our chest, but ultimately I serve in the House of Representatives, and I have no voice in this. Neither does Nancy Pelosi, and yet she still wants to come out and say things like, if you breathe air, you should be against this Supreme Court pick. I mean, that's ridiculous. She doesn't have any business making comments, certainly not of that nature, and it doesn't help the process at all.
Do you see, in any way, shape, fashion, or form, do you see things cooling off at some point in time? I mean, it feels like ever since the president has been sworn in, it has been somewhat chaos because of some of his administration's execution of some of their orders and the things that they want to do. But at the same time, it just seems like there is vitriol between Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. I can't imagine it's across the board, but we're certainly seeing it in leadership. Do you think that we're going to get worse before we get better, or do you think things will start cooling off soon?
Well, you alluded to this. It's not across the board. I mean, we do have relationships with our colleagues that are not necessarily reflected in what you see in the national discourse. So I want people to recognize that we are about trying to get some things done and work with folks, and that's particularly true in the House. But unless and until the broader anti-Trump forces come to terms with the fact that he won, we're going to continue to see this type of vitriol that remains, at or right at the surface and makes it difficult to move forward. And why that matters is because if we can't get these cabinet picks confirmed and move forward, then we ultimately will, but it's not productive to continue to delay for political points, posturing, whatever your motivation is. The president is entitled to his picks. He's going through the process as he should, and if you can't get with that, I just don't know, what the future holds for folks who can't come to terms with reality.
Let's talk about one of those picks. You and I had talked a few weeks ago about what was then a vacancy in the Agriculture Secretary position. Former Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue has now been selected for that post there. Tell me what you know about him, and what do you think about that pick?
Well, I will tell you this. I'm actually very pleased that we have a Southerner at the table, and I think that's going to help provide a geographic balance that has been lacking in agriculture, certainly in policy development. For as long as I can remember, we're just strictly outnumbered, and we've seen tweets from members from up north that they wanted somebody from the Midwest, and they've had somebody from the Midwest for the last 24 years, and I think it was a good pick. Provides some geographic balance. The reality is, at the legislative level, we're outnumbered, and so it's a lot easier to see Midwest priorities reflected in foreign policy, whereas we have now a counterbalance in the administration to help develop that in a way that's a little more fair and a little more respective of the geographic disparity and the cultural and agricultural practices that are different around the country. So I think that's a good pick.
Let's go to what will be one of the biggest topics you guys have been dealing with, will continue to deal with, and that is the repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act. What's it going to be replaced with, Congressman? Can you tell me?
Yeah, I think what people need to understand first and foremost is, we have to recognize that the Affordable Care Act has been an abject failure, and so we have to provide some reasonable alternative. A lot of those solutions can be found in the marketplace. For example, when you have continuing coverage for people that up to age 26 on their parents' policy, that was something that could easily have been addressed in the context of the marketplace, in the simple fix. Pre-existing conditions. As long as we have employer-based health care, which I think has been something that's been consistent for years in this country, you could still address pre-existing conditions in the marketplace by addressing portability. That is, being able to maintain that coverage from employer to employer. And what we used to have to do was through COBRA, which for many families was cost prohibitive. You had to decide whether you're going to make your mortgage and pay your grocery bill, or am I going to pay my COBRA premiums so that I can prevent an exclusion from my next carrier.
Let me
well,
interrupt
portability
you just a
would
second
help solve
here.
that. Another thing that would...
Congressman, let me interrupt you just a second, because we are short on time here with our satellite window. When will we see a piece of legislation or pieces of legislation that we will be able to dissect and analyze and start seeing some debate in committees on?
Well, I think that's forthcoming in both chambers. There have been 2 or 3 iterations of a replacement, and one of the things I think people have been sort of expecting is because Obamacare is an all-inclusive, overarching type of piece of legislation, they expect that what replaces it would be an overarching piece of legislation with a name. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to happen. Whatever you might call it, the antithesis of Obamacare, are you going to call it Trump care? I don't know. I don't know that you're going to see a single piece of legislation that fully repeals and replaces Obamacare. It's going to come in a series of actions that take place not only at the executive level, but at the agency level and also at the legislative level to address that. As a single piece of legislation, I don't know.
All right, I'm going to call it all Crawford care when it's all said and done, if that's all right with you.
No, I don't think so. You want to be careful when you put your name on something.
All right.
And I would be hesitant to put my name on any bill, good or bad, because it can always come back to bite you.
All right, Congressman Rick Crawford, as always, great to visit with you. Thank you for your time.